Welcome to the RTO Superhero Podcast with me, Angela Connell-Richards, where we'll explore the complexities of compliance and how to ensure business success within your RTO. This podcast is for anyone within the training industry who wants to learn from my experience as an RTO consultant, RTO manager, trainer and assessor, and entrepreneur, as well as the experience of other experts in this field. Listen in and let us help you become the RTO superhero you want to be. Welcome to the RTO Superhero Podcast with me, Angela Connell-Richards, and Lauren Hollows. Welcome back, Lauren. Great to have you back on board again. It's been a little while.
Yeah, it's like getting back on a bike with friends.
That's right.
It's all good.
So in today's episode, Lauren and I thought we would follow on from the theme that Maycheck and I had in our last podcast and discuss our first audit under the new standards. So Lauren, how many audits have you done so far under the new standards?
Yeah, so we've had three. We've had two initial registrations and then also a CRICOS slash RTO renewal, re-registration. And then we've just had a couple of interactions from like compliance monitoring activities that we're continuing on from, before the financial year.
Yeah. Okay, so we've had one. So we had an initial registration for RTO and CRICOS, and it went really well. We provided some additional documentation prior to the audit, and we had the opening meeting on a Friday, closing meeting on the Monday, and we had registration by the Friday. So I was pretty happy with that, but we've also heard some stories about people who are still waiting to get even called up about an audit because of the training products that they're putting on their scope. But we can talk about that a bit more later. Let's start with what was your experience, because I've already discussed this, my case. I'd like to know what your experience has been with the three audits that you've had so far. In particular, any differences between those as well, or consistency. So go for it.
So, look, in terms of registration or re-registration, I think obviously those are always going to be very different experiences, regardless of, the standards that we operate under. The two initial registrations were really, one of the things that I did see was there was a lot of focus on outlining the quality practices that the auditors had to go through. So they spent a lot of time speaking to the CEOs and basically saying, this is the process that we're going to go through. I've already reviewed your documentation. Now we're going to have a discussion. Then I'm going to take that back. I'm going to write up my final report. Then I'm going to sit with another assessor. We're going to go through that report together. If we both come to the same conclusion, we're going to make a referral. Then that referral is going to be reviewed and then a decision will be made. So they were really good about communicating the different steps in the process and what would happen, if there was a non-compliance found. Obviously, there was a very strong focus. So they did allow me to participate in all of the audits. However, they were very clear at the very beginning to say, we are happy for your consultant to participate in these things. However, you as the CEO, you as the people in the meeting are actually the ones who are going to be running the RTO. So we want to hear what you say. We want to hear how you are going to run the organization. And I think that was really important. One of the questions that they got was, how did you come to a decision about who you used as a consultant? So that I thought was very interesting because they basically said, like, what process did you go through to determine, who you would use as a consultant? Were they sufficiently qualified? They asked whether or not they checked my qualifications. So I think that's a great practice to see happening, because obviously there are RTO consultants out there that go and kind of sell like RTO in a box. They don't want the client to be really involved in the process. I think you and I operate quite differently from that, where it's like, no, you're going to be the one answering these questions. My role here is to prepare you in how to run your RTO. So watching a lot of those sorts of things come to fruition was really good to see. Obviously, much stronger focus on governance, on risk management, on how they ensured inclusion. So questions like, you know, what are your inclusion, what practices do you have so that you are inclusive? What are your reasonable adjustment processes? You know, do you have processes in place to support your First Nations students and staff? How do you respond to things like sorry business? All of those sorts of things that came more under the new standards that weren't really covered under our old standards. I thought that there was, I mean, in R1s, there was a lot of focus on that. Again, I think part of that process was because they literally came to us and went, your TASs are fine, your trainer matrices are fine, and your assessment tools are compliant. Had we had non-compliant assessment tools that we'd submitted, I think the whole audit process would have gone very differently. Yeah. In the CRICOS re-registration space, there was a huge focus on PRISMS data, on the management of PRISMS data, on pulling out a lot of different reports and things like that in relationship to, you know, when your non-commencements were lodged, when your deferrals were lodged, you know, if you notified a commencement, you know, a week after you were supposed to lodge the commencement. So there's definitely a lot more use of data in terms of the PRISM system happening. And I think that we're going to continue to see that focus. So, you know, we got a list of, I think about 4 different types of PRISMS breaches. And so it was things like, you know, you processed a non-commencement, you did it, you know, 3 days after it was due. You processed a deferral application 6 weeks after. And so we had to go back and demonstrate that, you know, a communication process had been put in place, that there was, you know, comms happening to the student. In certain circumstances, it was the fact that the student had notified us that they needed a deferral, but getting the actual evidence of the compelling and compassionate circumstances. You know, in one case, there was a parent that had passed away. Trying to get a death certificate from another country is not an easy process. And it took the RTO a while to get that documentation. So we had to provide the evidence of all the emails going back and forth between the students and things like that. So that has progressively increased in all of my PRISMS interactions. When we talk about, you know, anything in the CRICOS space with ASQA, they're using that data a lot more. And I'm actually finding we're having to do more and more training and create more and more like procedures on how we manage PRISMS. The PRISMS user guide is great, but like really having those checks of, you know, like every 6 months going and checking that the students' addresses are up to date, you know, being massively pedantic on noting the commencements and the non-commencements. You know, when you're processing the refunds, making sure you're going through all 4 stages in PRISMS of, you know, when that refund was made, the amount that it was made, the rationale for it, and all of that sort of thing. You know, or having all of that data, and, you know, you've got to train admin really well to understand it, which is one of the things that we don't see happening great in the PRISM space, in the CRICOS space.
We've seen quite a big focus on PRISMs, more so in the last year, not necessarily under the new standards. But that's very interesting because we're in the process right now of rewriting all of our CRICOS documentation to ensure that it aligns with the standards for RTOs. So we're just going through all of that now. But it was accepted in the last audit that we hadn't mapped those yet. So they were fine. The auditor was fine with that. But yes, I'm definitely seeing that there's more of an emphasis on how are you implementing PRISMs, and they're wanting to see it more in your policies and procedures, in your handbooks and things like that. So, yeah. So, what was the main differences that you found between, so you had 2 initial registrations. Was there any differences that you had?
So one was an external auditor and one was an internal auditor. So there were some slight differences in terms of the approval process between one and the other. However, I will say outside of that, not really. Both of the questions that we got, they obviously have like a list of questions against every standard, and they're kind of going, okay, ask this question, ask this question. So I'm just, very diligently going every question that asks, I'm writing it down into my big old checklist. And, it's one of those interesting things, like, do you want ASQA to release that list so that you can make sure your clients are prepared? But also, it's probably good for them to not, because, if you know your policies and you know the standards, whatever question you get asked, you should be able to respond to, right? So I'm in a bit of two minds on that one. I think we're gonna, in all of the interactions we've had so far under the new standards, the ASQA assessor has been very clear and kind of going, this is all new for us as well. We're still working our way through all of this. We're still, testing and trialing and figuring out what the best way is to approach this, because again, ASQA didn't write the standards, DEWA wrote the standards. ASQA is then just responsible for interpreting them. So I think that spirit of everything was very good. That's a completely separate process from everything that, these teams that are going out and shutting down RTOs and cancelling qualifications are going through. Those two activities are chalk and cheese. So,
and different departments too.
Yeah, we'll just continue to see. We'll continue to see that. That depending on how ASQA initially approaches you, and the mechanism through which they approach you. Yeah. If your first interaction with ASQA is them coming to do a site visit on you, and you're supposed to have 62 students on site and you've got 3, you should expect a different process. I'm just going to be honest.
Yes.
Expect a ride. And I do, like, as I said, we had a CRICOS registration, and I'd actually said to the client, I'm like, you're in for a rough ride. Like, this is not going to be easy. And we had three or four interactions with the regulator, pre and post the new standards getting logged. And then one day I got an email notification going, training.gov has been updated and your application's been approved. Or your application's been approved and training.gov will be updated. I got my notification through ASQAnet, and I called up the client and I went, you've been re-registered. And he goes, what? And I went, you've got re-registration. He goes, what? I was like, I'm looking at the email now. And he goes, CRICOS too? And I was like, hold on. And I was like, yep, you've got it all. And he was like, oh my God. And I was like, yeah, me too. And he was like, oh, that wasn't as hard as you made it sound like it was going to be. I was like, yeah, I know. Like, I'm like genuinely shocked, dude. I was like, look, we gave them more information than they asked for at every step.
Yeah, and I think that really does help. That's what we did with our initial is they said if they got any, so they had a list of what they wanted and the units that they wanted to go through, and do you have any other additional documents? So we just did it straight away, and we provided them with all the new policies and procedures. And I think that's the thing is, if you can demonstrate that you're prepared and ready, you're going to have a much smoother audit.
Yeah. And like being able to turn around, like, if somebody asks you if ASQA comes back, I know in one of our audits, our initials, we submitted 4 assessment tools. They came back to us and they asked us for 3 additional assessment tools, and they were sent through within, 72 hours or something like that. Yeah. I think little things like that, where the regulator tests you and go, have you just purchased the 4 units that you submitted to us, or are you actually ready to rock and roll? Yeah. I think little things like that.
Maycheck had the same. Yeah, Maycheck had the same, where the auditor asked for other assessment tools. Yeah, and very interesting that that you had that one as well. And also what I found with the auditor, we had she definitely did have a list, and she actually said, I've got these questions I've got to ask. So she went back down through the list and just asked all those questions. So so that was good, because it was because she wasn't focused on just the new standards, but they had actually specifically had a list of things that needed to be covered under the new standards. So yeah, so it'll be interesting to see. We've got about another 3 that are in for initial, and we've got about 5 who are up for re-reg over the next 6 to 12 months. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it goes. Some of the other things that we've seen is re-regs just going through, and because they're more focused on other areas, particularly if you've got a low risk RTO. However, they can just do a pop audit at any time in the next 2 years. So just because you get through on your re-reg with no audit doesn't mean it's not going to happen. So I would always be prepared.
For me personally, I would prefer to see no registration go through without a desktop. Even if the desktop is limited to, send me these 5 assessment tools,
And
these
TASs.
3 TAS, and these 2 trainer matrices of your choosing.
Yeah.
Within the next 72 hours, right? Or within the next week. You know, a really little test like that
will demonstrate.
For most RTOs is a really good indicator of whether or not they have their shit together, because you can go and look at their AVETness and go, well, you delivered this assessment tool you delivered that unit in November last year, right? And if they turn around and go, oh, well, we don't have that, we don't deliver it, you can turn around and go, well, you're full of shit.
Because it's in your data.
What you don't have is a compliant assessment tool that you want to provide to us. To me, I would rather see that on every single registration, even if it means you're only getting checked once every 7 years. Having a person dedicated to doing that would provide a higher level of quality assurance in the sector.
And I think that should be part of the ASQUANet process. So when you're submitting your re-reg, you should have to submit your TASs with it. So, and then, and I would think then the auditors would have a good idea of whether you'd be ready or not.
Well, you submit that spreadsheet which says the units you've deemed competent in the last 6 months, right? So, pick 3 units that they've delivered in the last 3 months, pick 2 student files, have them submit that. That'll tell you everything you need. That's how you and I do our audits, I'm sure. That's what I ask for. And from that, I've just done an audit on a provider. It took me 4 times going back to them, going, this is everything I expect you to upload. And from the first day, I was like, you need to upload your mapping guides. You need to upload your evidence of your assessor competency and currency. But it took a further 3 emails of me going, mate, these are the units I'm auditing. You've given me a mapping guide, but no assessment tool, or you've given me assessment tool, but no mapping guide. You've given me a trainer registration, but you haven't given me any of their actual documentation for me to see that they've actually got a freaking TAE. I should if I go to any compliance person and say, I'm auditing you, put up the documents that I need to audit it. And the RTO doesn't know that they need to give me a corresponding mapping guide to the assessment tool and the certificates for their trainers and assessors, it's a red flag.
And it definitely can show whether they're ready or not, and whether they so what I find when someone comes to us for an audit, they know they're non-compliant, they just don't know how non-compliant they are. They don't come to us because they think they're compliant. So it's very interesting, and you can tell by the conversation and by your initial list of documents that you request whether they're going to be ready or not. Yeah, definitely. All right, so my time has gone up. So thank you very much, Lauren, for being here today and sharing with us your valuable insights into what you've experienced so far under the new standards in audit. And as per usual, it's always a pleasure to have you join me on the RTO Superhero podcast. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us at the RTO Superhero podcast with me, Angela Connell-Richards. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast on your preferred podcast app. Each rating and review helps me fulfill my goal of helping training organisations around Australia to learn and grow in compliance and business success.